Some storms tear up more than just the land. They rip through time, memory, and everything you thought was unshakable. The sky had gone green just before it hit. That eerie, unnatural green people in Oklahoma know all too well. One second I was tightening a tarp over my brother Daniel's roof, and the next the world was screaming. The tornado came down fast and mean, like it had a personal vendetta. 10 minutes later, everything was wreckage. The silence after was worse than the roar. No birds, no engines. Just the pop of a downed power line and the distant wails of sirens starting to rise. I was stumbling through the chaos, blinking dust and disbelief from my eyes when I saw him. "That dog just climbed out of a tornado pile like he was late for work," I shouted, half laughing, half in shock, as I hopped over a twisted bicycle frame and the remains of a porch swing. There he was, a German Shepherd, mud-caked and limping, emerging from a shredded heap of lumber and insulation like it was a morning routine. His fur was matted with grime, one ear nicked, a streak of blood down his leg. And yet he moved like he'd done this 100 times before, determined, calm, and focused. Around us, the destruction looked like a war zone. The twister had torn through our corner of the county just before sundown. It flipped trucks in the feed store lot like toys, uprooted trees like weeds, and peeled half the roof off Daniel's house. I'd helped him nail it down just hours earlier. Now shingles were wrapped around a power pole 2 houses down. My truck, flattened like a soda can, but somehow I was still standing. And so was this dog. He came straight toward me like I owed him rent, head high, tongue lolling, tail flicking with cautious hope. He stopped right in front of me and looked up, eyes sharp, not fearful but expectant. I knelt, brushing bits of insulation and glass from his back. "Where'd you come from, boy?" He didn't flinch, didn't growl, just held my gaze like he was waiting for me to catch up to something he already understood. Then he turned, started walking down the shattered road, limping slightly on his back leg, paused, looked back. That look said it all. "Well, you coming or not?" I glanced back at Daniel. He had blood running down his brow, but he waved me off, steady as ever. "Go," he called out. "I'll get the others checked." And so I followed the stranger dog, my boots crunching glass, sidestepping live wires and twisted bikes. The road was barely recognizable, a mailbox lodged in a tree, a trampoline wrapped around a telephone pole. We passed neighbors shouting names, digging with their bare hands. One man knelt over a crushed sedan, crying into the steering wheel. But the Shepherd didn't hesitate. About half a mile down, he suddenly veered off the road into a field where a massive oak had fallen, its roots jutting up like a rib cage. He circled once, then gave a single sharp bark. I sprinted over, heart racing. My mind went to the worst. Then I saw her, a little girl, maybe 6 years old, crouched under the tangle of roots and dirt. Her blonde hair was knotted with leaves, her face streaked with dried tears and dust. She clutched a pink backpack like it was a lifeline. "Hey there," I said, gently crouching beside her. "You hurt, sweetheart." She didn't say a word, just held that backpack tighter. The dog, later we'd name him Kaiser, whined and stepped closer. She reached out and buried her fingers in his fur like she'd known him forever. Finally, she whispered, barely audible over the wind, "He came back." I carried her back to the road. Kaiser pressed tight to her side. She never let go of his fur. She didn't speak again until the EMTs arrived, and I couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd said those words. He came back. As if that dog had made a promise. As if somewhere, in the heart of the storm, he'd chosen to survive not for himself, but for her. Her name was Emily, 6 years old. No broken bones, no cuts deep enough to stitch. Just scraped knees, dirt-smudged cheeks, and a silence that weighed heavier than any injury. She didn't cry when the paramedics checked her over, didn't speak when they asked her name, but she held tight to that pink backpack, and tighter still to Kaiser. The EMTs looked at me like I had answers, but I only shook my head. "The dog found her," I said quietly. "I was just following." They tried coaxing her onto a stretcher, but she wouldn't budge unless Kaiser was allowed to come with her. So he did, hopping up beside her like it was his ambulance too. One of the techs shrugged and said, "You'd think this mutt's been trained for search and rescue." But Kaiser hadn't worn a collar, no vest, no tags, no chip when they scanned him. just instinct. While Emily was being checked at the hospital, word started to spread. A little girl found alive beneath an uprooted tree, thanks to a stray German Shepherd. Her photo made it onto a local news site by morning, and that's how her mother found her. I'll never forget the moment she arrived. She bolted through the emergency room doors, breathless and wild-eyed. When she saw her daughter safe in the hospital bed, she collapsed to her knees, but not in front of Emily, in front of the dog. "You saved my baby," she whispered, tears soaking into his fur. "You came back for her." Kaiser didn't bark, didn't wag his tail, just stood there, calm and silent, as if to say, "Of course I did." That's when we learned the rest. Emily's family trailer had been obliterated in the storm, leveled like it had never existed. Her grandparents, who lived next door, were still missing. Kaiser had belonged to them. Nobody could explain how he found her. Emily had been discovered nearly a mile from her home. There were no tracks, no sign she'd walked there. It was like the storm had picked her up and dropped her off under that tree. Or maybe Kaiser had carried her. Emily eventually began to speak again, softly, slowly, always with one hand resting on Kaiser's back. She told her mother she'd seen him through the trees, that he looked at her, barked once and vanished. But then he came back and waited. "I knew he would," she said. "I wasn't planning to keep him. Just figured I'd watch him for a while until someone claimed him. But that night, he curled up on the rug by my front door and didn't move. Not even when thunder rolled again in the distance. He just stared out into the dark, like he was already listening, already waiting. Because Kaiser wasn't finished, not even close. Kaiser settled in fast, like he'd always lived with me. No fuss, no barking, no chewing up shoes, just quiet loyalty, and that way he had of watching everything like it might fall apart again. I gave him a blanket in the corner, a bowl of whatever I was eating, and a promise that he could stay as long as he wanted. I didn't know then that he already had a mission in mind. 2 nights after Emily's rescue, I was halfway through fixing a busted window when Kaiser started growling low at the back door. It wasn't aggressive, more like urgency in canine form. I figured it was a raccoon or a wandering possum. I cracked the door open, flashlight in hand, ready to shoo something off. But he didn't bolt like he was chasing prey. He trotted into the night like he had an appointment. I sighed, grabbed my jacket, and followed him into the dark. "You sure this isn't just a squirrel hunt?" I muttered, crunching over broken branches and dried mud. Kaiser didn't answer, obviously, just kept glancing back to make sure I was coming. He led me past the edge of town, where the landscape still looked like a war zone. Crushed fences, overturned trailers, scattered sheet metal gleaming in the moonlight. The air smelled like wet wood, diesel, and distant smoke. My boots sank into the soft earth as we moved, careful, slow. Then he stopped, rigid, ears forward, at the edge of a collapsed hunting blind behind a grove of trees. One sharp bark. I scanned the area. Nothing but wreckage and shadow. Then another sound, faint, hoarse. "Help!" I scrambled forward, shining the light beneath the tangled wood and metal. And there he was, a man, mid-50s maybe, pale and shaking. His leg was pinned beneath a fallen beam, and his eyes squinted at the light like it was a dream. "Been here since the storm," he rasped. "Didn't think anyone was coming." I called emergency services immediately, pressing my jacket beneath his head while we waited. Kaiser lay down beside him, close enough to touch, as if he understood this man had been alone too long already. When help arrived, the man was lifted into the ambulance, muttering about an angel dog. "He stayed with me," he kept saying, "all night. Didn't leave." The medic said another few hours, and it might have been too late. By morning, the town was buzzing again. People started calling him the miracle dog. Daniel joked about bronze statues and naming the park after him. But Kaiser didn't care about that. He sat on the porch like always, eyes on the horizon, because he wasn't done yet. Something deep in him had woken up the night of the storm, and now he was listening for the next cry in the dark. It didn't stop with the man in the hunting blind. Kaiser had tasted purpose, and now it was like something inside him had switched on, a compass that pointed straight to the lost and the hurting. I wasn't just following a dog anymore. I was following something bigger. A week after the tornado, I was patching a broken fence when Kaiser bolted down the driveway. No bark this time, just laser-focused urgency. I dropped the hammer and went after him, heart thudding like it already knew. He led me to a stretch of county road where a truck lay upside down in a shallow ditch, half covered in branches and roofing tin. I shouted, got no answer, but Kaiser started pawing at the debris, digging faster than I could keep up. That's when I heard it, the faintest, tiniest sound of a baby crying. We tore through the wreckage, and there, under twisted metal and splintered wood, was a car seat. The baby was strapped in, dusty but alive, cheeks flushed red from crying, little hands trembling. We got her out just in time. Later that same week, Kaiser led me into the woods behind a neighbor's barn. I thought he was just chasing a rabbit, but no. He stopped at a hollowed tree and barked once. Inside, curled into himself like a feral thing, was a teenage boy. 17 maybe, eyes wide and wild. He'd run off after his family's trailer was destroyed. They thought he'd been swept away, but he'd been hiding, too scared, too ashamed. Kaiser didn't pressure him, just lay down a few feet away, tail sweeping the leaves, quiet and calm until the boy finally crawled forward and pressed his face into the dog's fur. And it kept happening. A man named Robert, found behind an abandoned shed, too weak to even yell. A woman in her 70s trapped under the porch of her own home, her voice hoarse from screaming into the void. Each time Kaiser led the way. Each time he moved like he knew exactly where to go. By the end of it, the count was 13. 13 people pulled from rubble, ditches, woods, silence. Kaiser never barked for credit, never asked for attention. He just waited for the next call. I started sleeping in my boots, jacket by the door, because when he barked, or worse, when he just looked at me and walked into the night, I knew someone out there needed saving. And Kaiser, he was already on his way. Word spread fast. News crews came out with their cameras and soft voices, filming him against the backdrop of broken barns and blooming sunflowers. Kids drew pictures of him with angel wings and hearts around his face. Someone made a little wooden plaque. To Kaiser, our guardian, through the storm. The town threw a ceremony in the park. They brought balloons and folding chairs, handed me a microphone I didn't want. Kaiser sat beside me, tongue out, eyes patient as ever. He didn't do it for the cameras, I said, voice low. He just went where he was needed. Applause followed. People clapped and wiped tears and took photos like he was some kind of celebrity. But Kaiser never seemed comfortable with any of it. Not frightened, just distant, like his mind was somewhere else, on someone else. That night he returned to the porch. Same spot as always. He didn't sleep. He never really did. Just watched the road, eyes steady, like he was waiting for a signal only he could hear. People asked if I thought he'd been trained, if he used to be a search dog. Maybe, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that he chose to stay, chose to keep looking, even after the headlines faded and the streets got swept clean. And he never stopped. I caught him once, months later, slipping away at dawn. I followed him without a word, trusting wherever he was going would matter. He led me to a woman stranded on the edge of town, car broken down, crying over a lost wedding ring. Kaiser didn't find the ring, but he curled up beside her until help came. That's the thing. He wasn't just about the rescues. He was about the comfort that came after. Some said he was just a dog, but those of us who knew better, we called him something else. The guardian, a quiet sentinel, born in the storm, shaped by something we still don't understand. He never left a soul behind, not when he could help it. And as long as the wind blew and roads cracked and someone somewhere cried for help, Kaiser would be watching. And when it mattered most, he'd come. Long after the tornado, long after the debris was cleared and the power poles were straightened again, people still asked about him. Is he still around? Does he still, rescue? I'd nod. Sometimes I'd smile. Sometimes I'd say, yeah, he's around. But deep down, I knew Kaiser was never really ours to begin with. He just showed up when we needed him and stuck around because someone still might. He never liked being inside. I tried once during a thunderstorm, brought him in, dried him off, gave him the softest blanket I owned. He sat for a while, eyes darting to the door, uneasy. Eventually, he padded out to the porch again, rain or not. That was where he belonged, watching, guarding. He got older. Muzzle turned gray, limps became more pronounced, especially on cold mornings. But he still perked up at the sound of sirens, still paced every time the wind picked up. Like part of him would always be caught in that first storm, ears tuned to distress, heart wired to respond. We kept count for a while. 13 rescues, then 14, 15. Eventually we stopped counting. Not because it didn't matter, but because numbers could never tell the full story. Not the quiet way he'd rest his head in someone's lap after they were pulled from the wreckage. Not the look in their eyes when they realized they'd been found. By him. People left notes on our porch, gifts, photos of him with their kids. One woman mailed a drawing her daughter had done. Kaiser wearing a superhero cape with the words, "My real hero." We framed it. Years passed. The town healed. New buildings went up, stronger ones. Trees regrew. Babies born that year were now riding bikes down the sidewalks. But still, Kaiser sat out front, a silent presence that reminded everyone. Someone had watched over them. And then one night, he didn't get up. It was peaceful. No pain. Just one last deep breath as the sun slipped below the horizon. I sat beside him, hand on his side, listening to the wind move through the grass. We buried him under the big oak at the edge of the property, the place where he'd barked the first time, the day he led me to Emily. Someone carved a simple stone. Kaiser, the guardian. He always found the lost. But the truth is, he never really left. Sometimes when the wind howls just right, I swear I hear paws on the gravel. When a kid scrapes a knee or someone's car won't start, folks still look up the road, half expecting him to trot over that hill. Maybe they're hoping, maybe they're remembering, and maybe that's what matters most. Not that he saved us, but that he reminded us someone always could. That there's a kind of goodness that doesn't need a leash or a command. Just the will to walk toward the storm when others run away. Some say he was just a dog, but to us, Kaiser was the storm's answer, and the proof that in our darkest moments, we are never truly alone.